Nicole Murphy, you're disgusting. You sat on that couch and you laughed. It ain't no moment. It's a mess. You wrong for that. You the type of women that let these men be evil. They gotta have some help, and women like you are that type of help.
Y'all, this was supposed to be just another quiet night on Instagram until two women with years of buried history hit live at the same time. What started as a normal stream turned into a full-blown digital collision. No filters, no PR teams, just raw accusations, rising voices, and a timeline that refuses to stay buried. On one side, Nicole Murphy, calm, calculated, and ready. On the other, LisaRaye McCoy, defensive, emotional, and not backing down. And then, the names started dropping. First, Michael Missick, the marriage that sparked years of blame. Then the past cracks open wider. Tony Martin, followed by Ray Lewis, a friendship line allegedly crossed. And just when the comments begin to spiral, the biggest detonation hits: Gary Payton, marriage, money, and a confrontation that reportedly turned public and ugly. But it doesn't stop there. Because what unfolds next isn't just a list of relationships, it's a pattern. A narrative flip. A question that turns everything upside down. Was this ever about betrayal or control? As the live continues, more powerful names get pulled into the storm. Al Sharpton. Genuine, and suddenly, this isn't gossip anymore. It's a web. Two sides. One truth, maybe. And a live stream that may have just exposed more than...
You allege, too, that Nicole Murphy had relations with your ex-husband. Were you two friends?
Mm-hmm. Birthday parties. I've been to her house. She was at my bachelorette party. But you know what? At that time, my mother told me then. She said, but you got to watch that one there. And I was like, who? I said, the one dancing. She said, yes, that's Eddie Murphy's. What? You said you got to watch that one.
Current wife at the time or ex at the time?
I want to say I think she was still married. They were still married. And I was like, no, And so, and your mom tell you something about new school, you feel like you old school, And she was right.
Y'all, no trailer, no warning, no damage control, just a notification, and then chaos. Within seconds, the screen split in two, and suddenly, Nicole Murphy and LisaRaye McCoy were staring each other down in front of thousands of viewers. Comments flooding, screens recording, nobody blinking. This wasn't a reunion. This was a reckoning. For years, one version of the story dominated headlines. LisaRaye, the betrayed wife. Nicole, the outsider who crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Clean, simple, easy to believe. But live streams don't follow old narratives. Nicole didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She let silence build long enough for the audience to lean in. Then she spoke. Measured. Direct. Unapologetic. She questioned the timeline. And that's when the energy shifted. Because timelines don't lie easily. LisaRaye pushed back immediately, anchoring everything to one name, Michael Missick, the marriage at the center of it all. The accusation that never faded. The betrayal that defined the narrative. But Nicole didn't argue the headline. She moved backward. Past the marriage, past the public story, back to the parts no one had been looking at. A different starting point.
That's true. Absolutely true.
So what happened exactly?
Just what you said. She messed around with my husband. Here's the thing. We've all done something that we regret. We've all made mistakes and we all have to learn from that. But when you start doing it and being messy enough to do it amongst family, how does a family kiss turn into a I'm sorry apology? Like, what do you mean? You didn't know that she was married? We all know that she was married. And that was 20 years. That's history. You don't do that amongst friends.
Right.
Because there's no loyalty. Right. There's no loyalty, and you got to look up, and your person that you invite into your house and you celebrating your birthdays and going to games with, you got to look up and they're in Italy with your husband.
Right.
A different pattern. And then names. First, Tony Martin. A relationship that, on the surface, looked stable, private, grounded. Then, Ray Lewis. Not a distant figure. Not a stranger. A connection inside the same circle. The comments accelerated. The tone tightened. This wasn't random anymore. Nicole didn't stack accusations, she aligned them. One after another, not louder, just clearer. Each reference pulling the audience further away from the original narrative and into something more complicated. Then came the name that detonated the chat. Gary Payton. A different scale. A different spotlight. Nicole outlined the relationship like a sequence. Visibility, proximity, investment.
My thing is this. When you're a woman and you grown, let's handle it like a woman. Let's talk face to face and let's get it out. But here's the thing. I sat with her a couple of months ago, longer than a couple of months ago, about 6 months ago. And
this was after the alleged affair?
Before before.
Okay.
And I said, let's talk about it, because I waited a very long time for you and I to get like this right here, face to face, you know. And
no, she's talking about Nicole, not me.
Right.
Relax.
And we had a good conversation, because she said to me, you know what? We're two older women that look good that's in the business. I hate this. And I do too, because I hate when we can't bridge the gap between women. You know, we should not be in that position.
Right.
Nicole didn't chase the interruptions. She redirected. She referenced behavior, decisions, timing, overlap. The kind of details that don't trend, but stick. Then she widened the lens. Not accusations, associations. Al Sharpton, genuine. 2 names. No explanations. And somehow that said more. Because the conversation wasn't about any single moment anymore. It was about access. Circles. Movement between them. The chat split defense, disbelief, demands for proof. But the silence between statements carried its own weight. LisaRaye recalibrated. Her tone shifted from defensive to deliberate. She reframed the entire exchange, positioning Nicole's points as deflection, as strategy, as an attempt to rewrite a history that, in her view, was already clear. For a moment, it worked. The narrative tightened again. Until Nicole asked one question. Simple, precise, unavoidable. If everything was as straightforward as it had been presented for years, why did the timeline look like this? No shouting, no interruption, just a pause that stretched longer than anything else on that live. And in that pause, the story stopped being about one accusation. It became about a pattern no one could unsee.
I don't want to stress you out by trying to keep up with my lifestyle that I already have and am accustomed to. Why? Because if I'm going to these restaurants just for lunch meetings and it takes you your whole check to take me there, I don't want to stress you out. You cannot.
The pause didn't break the live, it redefined it. Because once that question landed, the energy shifted from reaction to examination. Not who said what, but what actually lines up. On screen, LisaRaye McCoy didn't retreat. She adjusted. Her tone cooled, her words sharpened. She reframed the entire moment as a diversion, an attempt by Nicole Murphy to dilute a very specific allegation tied to Michael Missick. It was a strategic reset. Pull everything back to one claim.1 moment that defined years of public perception. For a second, the structure held. Then Nicole shifted again. Not louder, more precise. She stopped naming events and started connecting timing. Overlaps. Transitions. The space between one relationship ending and another beginning compressed, unclear, difficult to separate cleanly. She didn't present it as chaos. She presented it as continuity. And that's what made it land. Because continuity suggests design.
How'd you find that out?
I had checked the manifest of my plane, because we owned a plane. And so when you check that list, it says all the people that have rode on the plane. And she didn't ride on it with me, and nor did she receive an invitation from me. So if you had a girlfriend that has her own island, I would think that you would call and say, hey girl, I'm coming, because I was getting everybody to come. So why you would accept an invitation from him and you don't even know him is unbeknownst to me. I don't know how that could happen. Do you? I guess not.
I never owned a private plane or
not that part.
No, I don't know, but you know the meaning. Yes, this is too rich for me. You know, the manifest of the list. Like, damn. So you saw her name on the list,
and I tried to call her, and you know, at first she said, "No, I haven't been to Turks and Caicos. I have not been." And it was like, "Well, wait a minute," you know. And then I called again, and then she stopped answering the phone. So at the time she was dating, at this time,
Michael
when
Strahan?
I found out, she was dating Michael Strahan. So I called him and I said, hey, do you know anything about this? And, you know, we talked or whatever. And I said, well, you know, let me send you a tape.
LisaRaye cut in, direct, controlled, refusing to let the frame settle. She challenged the interpretation, questioned intent, pushed back on the idea that proximity equals pattern. Her stance was clear. Correlation is not confirmation. But the live wasn't moving on logic alone anymore. It was moving on momentum. Nicole leaned into that momentum without raising the temperature. She revisited the earlier sequence. Tony Martin, then Ray Lewis, not as isolated claims, but as reference points. Anchors in a timeline that, according to her, repeated
I have of proof, you know. And so I did.
What tape? What was on the tape?
You know, it was a tape of her and Michael where she was dropping Michael off at the private airport in her car, and they opened the gate and they pulled up to the plane, and she gets out and he gets out, and I go, oh, I didn't know y'all knew each other.
And I'm gonna leave it right there because that part is my business. The other part is someone else's business, which I've never, would speak on. But for me, that was enough. It was like, wow, I'm gonna whoop your ass.
Me too.
Friends don't do that now. You know what I'm saying? Like that's something that I would think an enemy would do, or somebody that I just don't know. But someone that you have to watch your girl. Where I come from, south side of Chicago, that's an ass whooping. That's an ass whooping. Period.
Two narratives. Same events, different meanings. The comments surged again, picking sides, pulling clips, building threads in real time. But the live had already crossed a threshold. This was no longer about proving a single point. It was about which version felt consistent. Nicole widened the lens one more time, briefly referencing Al Sharpton and Genuine again. No details. No elaboration. Just enough to suggest that the visible timeline might not be the complete one. And then she stopped. No pylon. No final blow. Just space. LisaRaye stepped into that space with a different approach. Less reactive. More deliberate. She challenged the premise itself, the idea that a sequence of associations can be stitched into intent without direct proof. She positioned the entire thread as inference layered on speculation. It was a logical counter. But logic wasn't the only thing on display. Because what the audience had just witnessed wasn't a confession or a clear resolution. It was something harder to dismiss. A reframing. The original story, simple, direct, widely accepted, now had edges. Gaps that felt sharper than before. Questions that didn't cancel the past, but complicated it. And complications don't disappear when a live ends. They linger. As the comments continued to scroll and the connection began to strain, one thing became clear. No one had definitively won that exchange. But the narrative was no longer the same. The live didn't crash. It ended abruptly, almost clean. No final statement. No closure. Just a frozen frame, and then silence. But silence online doesn't mean the story stops. It means the story spreads. Within minutes, clips were everywhere. Edits slowed down, captions sharpened, pauses replayed. Every look, every interruption, every half-finished sentence turned into evidence. Not of what happened, of what it might mean. Because what the audience witnessed wasn't a resolution. It was a fracture. A moment where one narrative, held steady for years, was forced to carry new weight. On one side, LisaRaye McCoy, holding the original claim together, reinforcing the center point, refusing to let the story drift beyond it. On the other, Nicole Murphy, not replacing the story, but expanding it, stretching it backward, outward, until it became harder to contain. And in between those two positions, the audience. Rewatching. Reevaluating, reconstructing. Because once a timeline is questioned, everything attached to it becomes unstable. The names resurfaced again, this time without voices attached to them. Tony Martin, Ray Lewis, Gary Payton, Michael Missick. Placed side by side, not as headlines, but as sequence. And sequences invite interpretation. Clips focused on transitions, how quickly one chapter appeared to follow another. Edits highlighted overlap, timing, proximity. Not proving anything outright, but suggesting a rhythm that didn't feel accidental. Then came the wider circle. Al Sharpton, Genuine. Two names that had barely been explained on the live, now pulling disproportionate attention. Because absence of detail creates its own kind of gravity. People filled in gaps. Threads connected dots, some conclusions were careful. Others weren't. And that's where the story shifted again. From what was said to what was inferred. Because the most powerful moments from that live weren't the loudest ones. They were the quiet transitions. The unanswered questions. The places where neither side fully closed the loop. Those gaps became the center of the conversation. Was the original narrative incomplete, or was the new framing selective? Did the sequence indicate intent, or was it coincidence arranged to look like design? There was no consensus. Only momentum. Meanwhile, neither side returned to clarify. No follow-up live.no joint statement.no clean timeline released to settle the debate. Just distance. And distance, in a moment like this, doesn't calm things down. It amplifies them. Because without a final version to anchor to, every version competes. Every clip becomes a lens,